In 1995, a solo backpacker vanished along Montana's Bitterroot Range. Search teams found his tent, his pack, but not him. Only one photo remained on his camera, a trail marker that didn't exist on any map. 29 years later, a buried trail camera is uncovered by hikers near a collapsed rock face. Inside it, the missing hiker's final moments and someone else watching him. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe if you're drawn to real-life mysteries, wilderness disappearances, and disturbing stories that unfold over decades. June 18, 1995. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana, near Bear Creek Trailhead. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, but the clouds still hung low and heavy, bruising the sky with streaks of ash. Beneath them, a lone figure crouched by a cracked wooden post, the trail marker's lettering worn smooth by time and neglect. He paused. There was no arrow, no blaze, just the carved image of a tree with a circle around it, something not printed on any of the maps he had triple-checked before coming. But the path, it was real. Narrow and overgrown, sure, but packed beneath his boots in a way that suggested history. It wound between black fir trees, deeper into the valley, where the fog swallowed all shape and sound. His fingers hovered over the strap of his camera, hesitating. Then he took the photo. That shutter click would be the last anyone heard from Simon Greaves. 2 weeks later, his tent was found 4 miles off course, his sleeping bag still zipped, his campfire cold. His backpack sat upright beneath a granite overhang, untouched. But of Simon, no trace, no trail, no sign out in the register. Just one undeveloped roll of film, with a final image that made searchers uneasy. A path that didn't exist, and a figure, barely visible in the trees, standing still. September 2nd, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana, near Lost Horse Creek Overlook. The trail wasn't supposed to split. Leah Madsen paused, squinting at the fork ahead. One side curved upward, framed by thickets of elderberry and goldenrod. The other dipped sharply downhill into a dark corridor of pines. There were no trail signs, no blazes on trees. Just silence, thick and humming with the kind of stillness that made her uneasy. Behind her, Mason adjusted his pack, the aluminum frame creaking. "There's nothing on the topo map," he said, wiping sweat from his temple. "It should just be a switchback, not a fork." Leah frowned. She had planned this hike down to the mile, a 3-day loop through the Bitterroot backcountry, off the main paths, before tourist season ended. They had permits, emergency comms, bear spray. She wasn't new to this, but she didn't like surprises in the woods. The canopy shifted overhead as clouds drifted in. The sky had been bright when they left that morning, but now it was dulling, muted, like someone had dimmed the forest without warning. "We stick to the plan," she said finally, pointing uphill. "Back to the elevation line, no rogue detours." They pressed forward. The silence deepened with every step. No birdsong, no insects. Even their boots, which had crunched over gravel and roots all morning, now sank into a quieter, loamy floor. After a while, Mason asked, "Is it me, or is this trail not trodden?" Leah nodded slowly. The path had faded beneath them. Less of a trail now, more of a suggestion. Shrubs brushed their knees. The air felt cooler, though the sun hadn't changed. And something else, a faint chemical tang in the air. Not unpleasant, not strong, just off. They came to a clearing. It was a rocky alcove, shielded by jagged granite boulders. At the far end stood a weathered wooden sign, or what was left of it. Only the post remained upright. The plank itself had rotted through, fallen, and split. But something was buried beneath it. Mason knelt, brushing aside pine needles and damp moss. A rusted corner of metal glinted in the earth. He tugged carefully. A rectangular box emerged, dented and caked in mud. An old trail camera. Not a wildlife grade. This was older, military maybe. 1990s. Hinged metal housing, a cracked lens cover, and a faded sticker peeling off the side. Property of U.S. Forest Service. Leah crouched beside him. Is it film? Mason twisted the latch open. Inside, the housing was dry. The internal casing was intact, and there, lodged in its belly, was a 35mm roll, still sealed. Black plastic. Kodak branding barely visible beneath the dust. It shouldn't have survived out here, Leah murmured. Not for, what, decades. Let's not celebrate yet. Could just be sun-bleached moose butts and squirrels, Mason offered, half joking. But even he didn't sound convinced. The presence of the camera felt wrong. This wasn't a corridor for animal crossings. The angle faced into the woods, not out over a trail. Someone had hidden this here on purpose, and it hadn't seen daylight in a very long time. By nightfall, they had made it back to camp, the air cooler, the forest quieter than it should have been. Leah sat on a log by the fire pit, the film canister turning in her fingers like a worry stone. Mason was already digging out the emergency sat phone. You calling it in? Not yet, he said, but I'm texting Evan to see if the station in Missoula still develops this stuff. If it's intact, we'll know by tomorrow. The fire cracked and hissed as damp pine cones popped in the heat. In the shadows beyond their light, the trees stood impossibly still. That night, Leah dreamed of camera flashes in the woods. Not from her own hands, not from anything she could see, just the sound, the click of a shutter in the dark, over and over. Then a voice, low and close to her ear, whispering a single word. Turn back. September 3rd, 2024. Location, Missoula, Montana. University of Montana. Photographic Archives Lab. The smell hit Leah the moment she walked through the door. A sharp blend of vinegar, chemicals, and dust. A smell she hadn't experienced since high school darkroom class, where images swam to life under red light like ghosts surfacing from the past. The lab assistant, a wiry grad student named Evan Jasson, was already hunched over the equipment, carefully threading the ancient 35mm film onto the reel with latex-gloved hands. His face glowed under the overhead fluorescence, lit with cautious excitement. I've only seen one of these old Canfield Trail cartridges come through here before, he said. This one's in good shape, shockingly. No water damage. Looks like it was wrapped in wax paper, too. That probably saved it. Mason hovered behind Leah, arms crossed. He hadn't said much since the drive down from the mountains, but Leah could feel his unease vibrating in the quiet. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was dread. Evan glanced up. You sure about this? No, Leah said honestly, but we need to know. They watched through the glass as he closed the development tank and began the chemical process. The slow, careful dance of stop bath, fixer, rinse. The room filled with a faint gurgle of fluids draining and cycling. 20 minutes later, the film strips hung on a drying line, dripping quietly. There's content, Evan confirmed, peering at the negative rows. Images look dense, grainy, but they're there. He began scanning the negatives onto his workstation. One by one, distorted images popped onto the monitor. Green-tinted, foggy, marked by time. Most were innocuous. Trees, a stream, a rock outcrop with lichen patterns. The composition was amateurish but deliberate. Someone had been trying to document something. Or someone. Then the sixth image froze him. Evan zoomed in slowly, leaning toward the monitor. What the hell? The photo showed a narrow trail bending into dense woods, surrounded by dark conifers. But that wasn't what pulled them in. In the left third of the frame, Barely visible at first, stood a man, back turned, shoulders squared, standing at the edge of the trail in the shadows, unmoving, watching. His shape was indistinct, but something about the angle, the rigidity, felt wrong. "Maybe it's just another hiker," Mason offered, but even as he said it, the words fell flat. Because in the next photo the figure was closer, in the next closer still. And then, gone. 6 more frames followed. Empty woods, a shift in perspective as if the camera had been moved or dropped. The angle dipped, tilted, showed a blur of tree roots and pine needles. Then, nothing but static. "That's the last exposure," Evan said quietly. The room felt colder now. The hum of the equipment was suddenly loud and oppressive. Leah stared at the figure in the 6th image again. "That trail, it's not marked. It wasn't on the map." Evan nodded. "Not part of any official system. I can run it through GIS overlays, but it might be old, abandoned, or worse, unofficial on purpose." She turned toward Mason. "What was the guy's name from the 90s? The one who went missing up near Bear Creek?" "Simon Greaves," he said. "Photographer. Went solo. Never found." Leah's stomach turned. What if this was his camera? They left the lab with a folder of printed images, still warm from the laser jet. Leah couldn't stop staring at the one with the figure. There was something about the man's posture, the way his shoulders jutted like he was listening, or waiting. Back in their motel, Mason spread the photos out on the desk like a crime scene reconstruction. "Look at the timestamp," he said, pointing to the lower corner of the scan. June 18th, 1995. 29 years to the day before they'd found the camera. Leah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. The curtain swayed slightly, though the air conditioner wasn't on. "What trail was he on?" she asked softly. Mason didn't answer, because neither of them knew. They had stood on it, walked part of it, then turned around. But the truth was, they hadn't followed it all the way. Not yet. And something, or someone, might still be there. September 4th, 2024. Location: Bitterroot National Forest, Montana. U.S. Forest Service Ranger Station, Darby. The old ranger looked up from the faded logs book, then down again as if rereading it might change what was there. "Simon Greaves," he muttered, dragging a thick fingertip across the yellowed page. Signed in, June 17th, 1995. Expected out the 20th. Never signed out. Leah and Mason sat across the desk, quiet. The office smelled like coffee and worn canvas, forest maps curling on the walls, a mounted elk head watching from above the door. Outside, pine trees swayed in a slow, late summer wind, but the air inside the room was unmoving. Heavy. The ranger's nameplate read, K. Ward, a Vietnam vet turned backcountry lifer who had probably seen more wilderness disappearances than he cared to recount. "We searched," he said, voice gravel thick. "I was here then. I remember it. Full deployment, volunteers, helicopters, dogs. Never found so much as a boot print after the second day. Closest thing we had to a lead was an undeveloped roll in his pack. Exposed to moisture, ruined. Yours is the first film I've heard of since." Mason laid one of the trail photos on the desk, the 6th frame, the one with the figure. Ward leaned forward. The light caught the deep folds of his face as he squinted at the grainy image. "Where'd you say you found this again?" "Near Lost Horse Creek," Mason said. "Not far off Bear Ridge Trail. In a hollow. The camera was buried under an old marker post." Ward didn't blink. He reached for a drawer and pulled out a laminated sheet, an archived topographic overlay dated 1992. He laid it beside the photo, tapping near the lower right quadrant. "There was a ranger cabin here back in the 70s, he said. Fire spotter post. Decommissioned. The trail to it got closed in '85. Slide took out part of the switchback and we were underfunded that year. It was never reopened. Leah frowned. But not erased? Never officially removed either. Some folks think that if a trail's not on current maps, it doesn't exist. But the forest remembers, especially the places we tried to forget. He stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and returned with a faded, wrinkled file labeled Simon Greaves, missing person in red marker. Inside were brittle printouts, a copy of his permit, and a photocopied driver's license. Simon looked young, mid-20s, with angular cheekbones and a quiet smile. The photo was black and white, the corners curled like a leaf left in the sun too long. There were rumors, Ward said finally, voice lower now, about that side of the ridge. Things people heard out there. One hunter claimed he saw smoke rising from a slope where there were no camps. Another swore he saw a figure staring down at him from a rock shelf. Never moved. Just stood there. Leah's voice was barely above a whisper. You think someone's living out there? Ward shrugged. I think the wilderness has corners we never fully mapped, and some things don't want to be found. By late afternoon, Leah and Mason were driving the winding mountain road back toward Bear Ridge, the truck's tires humming over cracked asphalt. A storm had passed the night before, and the clouds still clung to the peaks like scars. The light had that strange quality, neither gold nor gray, but something in between, like memory. They stopped at a turnout to stretch their legs, the valley unfolding below like a tapestry. Mason stood near the guardrail, arms resting on it, staring into the tree line. You believe him? He asked. Ward? Mason nodded. Leah inhaled the pine-laced air. I believe the trail was buried on purpose, and I believe someone wanted to erase it or control who finds it. Mason turned to face her. You're thinking about going back, aren't you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Back at the motel that night, Leah laid out their printed maps on the bedspread. She marked the area the trail camera was found, then the site of the abandoned ranger cabin Ward had pointed to. A thin line connected them, not from any official route, but a probable path, old and overgrown, hidden beneath decades of foliage. She traced it with her pen, a trail not on any map. Then she marked a third point, the photo with the standing figure. If her estimation was correct, he was near a known overlook above a box canyon, a blind spot in both drone and aerial search coverage from the '90s. Something clicked in her mind. Not a hunch, a direction. I want to follow the old trail, she said quietly. Mason looked up from his seat near the window. You want to disappear too? No, she said. I want to bring someone back. September 5th, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana, Lost Horse Ridge Trail. The forest was different this time. Not because the light had changed, though it had in that soft, golden way late summer mornings tend to do. Not because the air was cooler, though it carried a sharper edge now, as if fall were watching from just over the horizon. It was different because now Leah knew what to look for. The same trailhead welcomed them with its familiar wooden kiosk and bear warning stapled to the corkboard. Same register box, but everything beyond it, every bend, every shadow, held new weight. This wasn't a recreational hike anymore. It was an excavation. Mason said little as they climbed the first 2 miles in silence. The undergrowth rustled beneath their boots. Occasionally a bird would burst from a branch above, wings thudding hard against the stillness. They reached the split in the trail just before noon, the unmarked fork that had first stirred their unease. Leah stopped and crouched beside the faded tread. No fresh prints, she said, brushing pine needles aside. But this is still a path. Someone made it once. Mason pointed uphill. This is where it gets sketchy. They moved slowly now, navigating between overgrown huckleberry bushes and waist-high grasses that hadn't seen boots in years. The trail narrowed, dipped, then rose again into a natural corridor of moss-covered rock. The canopy thickened. Light dimmed. About an hour in, they found the first sign. It was a tree, a massive Douglas fir with a distinct horizontal gash across its trunk, about chest height. Not fresh, weathered, but unmistakably human-made. A trailblaze. The kind used by backcountry rangers decades ago. Leah touched it gently. Still here. Mason scanned the area. So where's it led? A short descent followed, and the landscape changed again. The forest opened into a narrow draw, flanked by cliffs on both sides. A dry creek bed curled along the bottom like a spine. The rocks were slick with lichen, but something else glinted among them, a strip of canvas. Leah slid down the slope and pulled it free, a fragment of olive-green tent fabric, partially buried beneath soil and leaf litter. It tore easily in her hands. Nearby, Mason crouched over something else, a rusted pot, denting around the lip, ash staining the inside, and beside it, a charred log, fire-blackened long ago. Campfire pit, he said. Old. How old? He shrugged. Could be years, could be decades. The Forest Service doesn't clear abandoned camps up here. Leah stood slowly, heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. This wasn't just a detour trail. People stayed here. They pressed deeper into the draw. By mid-afternoon, clouds had begun to gather again. A low wind rattled the branches overhead. The trail became harder to follow, not from erosion, but from time. Logs had fallen across it. Shrubs had reclaimed the clearings, but every so often they'd spot another marker, a blazed stump, a small pile of stones, a rusted nail embedded in a trunk. Then, the cabin appeared. It materialized at the far end of a slope like something half-remembered from a dream. Weather-beaten, crooked, half-swallowed by undergrowth. Its roof had collapsed on one side, and moss blanketed what remained. One window shutter still hung, swinging faintly in the breeze. Mason let out a low whistle. That's it. They approached slowly. Leah stepped onto the porch, or what was left of it, and peered inside. The interior was stripped bare. Dust coated everything. A single iron stove sat in the corner, its door ajar, blackened from a long-dead fire. Empty shelves lined the wall. In the far corner, something glinted. She knelt and brushed back debris. A small square metal box, hinged, locked with a simple clasp. Trail log, she whispered, or gearbox. Mason joined her. Together they pried it open. Inside, a compass badly corroded. A mildewed topographic map, the ink bled out. And beneath it, a small sealed envelope. Waterproofed, folded several times. Leah opened it with careful fingers. Inside, a single handwritten note in shaky script. If anyone finds this, he's not gone. I saw him. He was standing across the creek, same place, 3 days in a row. Watching, not moving, don't follow the ridge, it doesn't come back. The note was unsigned. The sky outside had darkened now, and a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the range. Mason backed away from the cabin door. We should head down, but Leah wasn't moving. Her eyes were fixed on the tree line beyond the clearing, where the forest grew even denser, and where the faintest path still seemed to snake upward toward the ridge. Someone left that for a reason, she murmured. Yeah, Mason said quietly. To tell us to stop. September 6th, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana. Northern Spur, abandoned ridge path. The ridge was steep. Not impossibly so, but steep in the way that discouraged casual hikers. The kind of incline that stole your breath and punished your calves, reminding you with every step that this wasn't a place made for comfort. They had left the cabin just after sunrise, daylight still sifting through the mist like smoke. Leia led the way, boots digging into the softened earth, her pack light but her chest tight with anticipation. Every 100 feet or so she paused, scanned the trees, looked for signs, broken branches, unnatural spacing, a footprint where the duff had shifted. She found almost none. It was as if the trail ahead had been swallowed. Mason followed in silence. He'd said little over breakfast, just a quiet, "You sure?" when she'd marked the direction on the map. She'd nodded, and he hadn't argued, but now she could feel his eyes on her back. 2 hours in, they crested a false summit. The ridge plateaued briefly, revealing a narrow spine of earth edged by cliffs on both sides. Below them, the valley was a mosaic of pine, rock, and mist, beautiful and endless. To the west, thunderclouds were starting to gather. Then Leah stopped dead in her tracks. In front of her, carved into the side of a pine, was another blaze. Not the usual ranger slash. This one was newer, crude, jagged, 4 vertical lines and one across them, like a tally mark. 5. Mason saw it too. "That's not Forest Service." "No," she said, "it's a count." "Of what?" She didn't answer. They continued on, more slowly now. The wind had picked up. High in the canopy, branches groaned. A squirrel darted through the brush, startling Mason into gripping the bear spray tighter. They were nearing tree line when Leah spotted it. A thin strip of faded nylon wedged between 2 rocks. She knelt. It was a strap, torn from a backpack. Moss-covered, sun-bleached, but still identifiable. Dark green. She ran her fingers over the frayed edge, heart hammering. "This could be Simon's." Mason didn't respond. His eyes were on the ground just beyond her, where the soil turned strangely flat, compressed. "A campsite," he murmured, "old but used." Leah stood and followed his gaze. The area was about 10 feet wide, tucked behind a low rock wall. A circle of stones formed a primitive fire ring. Ashes had long since scattered, but buried in the soot, she spotted something glinting. She dug carefully, a belt buckle. Tarnished but intact. Plain brass with the initials SG etched faintly on the underside. Mason exhaled slowly. "That's not coincidence." "No," Leah said. They both turned toward the trees just beyond the site. A narrow path, barely more than a thread, disappeared into thick underbrush. It dipped, then rose again, vanishing over the far shoulder of the ridge. It was where the figure had been standing in the photograph. They were sure of it. "We go that way," Leah said. Mason hesitated. "And what if we're not the first?" She looked back at him. "We're not. That's what scares me." They pushed forward. The ridge narrowed, the path turning uneven and rocky, bordered by steep drops on either side. As they walked, the forest grew eerily still. Even the wind seemed to mute itself. Every sound became amplified. The crunch of gravel, the rustle of a jacket, the occasional crack of a twig that made Mason flinch. Eventually they came to a small clearing, a bowl-shaped depression surrounded by crumbling granite walls. In the center stood a structure. Not a cabin, not a shelter, a cairn. Nearly 5 feet tall, stones carefully stacked, dry-fitted without mortar. At its base lay something unnatural, a strip of duct tape, a rotted shoelace, and a small, rusted keychain flashlight. Leah stepped forward and ran her hand across the stones. The surface was cold, damp. Near the top, a small object had been wedged between 2 rocks, a weatherproof match container. She pulled it out. Inside was a folded note, handwritten, a different scrawl than before. "I saw him again. On the ledge, just watching, never moves, the trail doesn't loop. Don't let it take you past the cairn." Leah looked up sharply, scanning the cliffs around them. Nothing moved, no sound, no shape. But the feeling had returned. The sensation of being watched. like something just beyond the edge of visibility was holding its breath. She backed away slowly, her fingers clenched tight around the note. "We don't go farther today," she said. "We pitch camp here, before dark." Mason nodded, his voice tight. "And tomorrow?" She looked toward the rising trail that vanished behind a jagged rock ledge. "Tomorrow, we find out where it ends." September 7th, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana. Just beyond the cairn, Upper Ridge Ledge. The sky had already begun to pale when they broke camp. Neither Leah nor Mason had slept much. The night had been colder than expected, their sleeping bags damp with condensation, and strange sounds, not animal, not wind, had stirred them awake more than once. Once, around 3 a.m., Mason had sat bolt upright, eyes wide. "I heard footsteps," he'd whispered, circling, but no one had appeared. No tracks by morning, just silence, and the cairn still standing, unbothered, like a watchman who never slept. Now, as the sun began to warm the frost from their packs, they started climbing again. The trail beyond the cairn was less a path and more a scar, carved sharply into the mountainside, narrow and exposed. To the left, a drop of several hundred feet into brush-choked ravines. To the right, a steep incline of broken shale. The air here was thinner, harsher. After 30 minutes of tense silence, Leah stopped. "What is it?" Mason asked. She didn't answer. She was staring at something ahead. Half buried in the rocks was a torn page, weather-beaten, edges curled like dried leaves. She pulled it free with care. It was from a journal. August 16th, 1995. Day 3. I saw him again. Same place, same hour. At the tree with the lightning scar. He's not looking at me. He's looking through me. And every time I blink, he's closer. I'm starting to think this trail loops, not in space, but in time. I pass landmarks that shouldn't be here. Things I didn't walk by. I don't think I'm lost. I think the mountain wants to keep me. Mason read over her shoulder. "It's him," he said. "Simon." Or someone else who followed. Ahead, a twisted pine stood at the edge of a bluff. Its trunk was split by a long, jagged black mark, lightning scarred, exactly as described. And beside it was a stone bench. No, not a bench. A rock, flattened and squared, clearly cut and placed. Someone had shaped it. The kind of thing no hiker builds by accident. Leah crouched beside it. Scratched into its surface was a name, almost eroded out of existence. Greaves. Her breath caught in her throat. "This is a memorial. Or a warning," Mason said softly. Behind them, the wind shifted. They both turned instinctively. Nothing. But the air had changed. It was colder again, without explanation. And somewhere above, near the ledge, a pebble clicked against stone. They climbed cautiously to the next rise. There, nestled against the cliff wall, was a shallow alcove. Inside it, a collapsed tent, bleached white by sun and time. Torn fabric fluttered slightly in the breeze. Scattered near the entrance were a shattered lens cap, 2 AA batteries, and a red carabiner. Leah's breath shook. "It's him." She stepped forward, brushing aside the collapsed nylon. Inside the tent was a rolled sleeping pad, a crumpled windbreaker, and, near the far corner, a small metal tin, like an old tobacco box. She opened it. Inside were a handful of objects, each like a whisper from the past. A button, a note folded 4 times, and a film canister sealed with electrical tape. Mason knelt beside her. "That's the second roll." She nodded. He had 2 cameras, one left at the fork. "This one, here." The note was brittle but legible. "If you're reading this..." I waited too long to turn around. "If he follows you, don't look back. Don't answer. He's only real if you do. I buried the negatives at the bench. One frame shows him. Just one. Leah stood quickly and turned back toward the scarred pine. They hadn't thought to check beneath the bench. 10 minutes later, Mason's trekking pole struck something solid just under the surface. Together they dug through the loose dirt and dry moss. A small waterproof bag emerged. Inside it, a tightly wound roll of negatives, kept in a plastic film sleeve. They held it to the sunlight, angling carefully. Dozens of frames were indistinct, overexposed. But near the middle of the roll, one frame made them both go silent. A photo of the stone bench, taken from the trees. And there, standing behind it, blurry, almost blending into the rock, was a tall figure. Still, watching, his face was in shadow. But his presence was undeniable. Not imagined, not a story. Mason exhaled. Someone was here, watching him, watching us. Leah felt a chill that had nothing to do with altitude. "We're not done," she said. "We're just starting to understand what happened to Simon." They didn't descend that night. Instead, they camped lower, just below the bench, firelight flickering weakly against the rock wall. And when the wind rose after dark, they heard it again. The sound of something moving in the trees. Slow, deliberate, always just out of view. Not breaking branches, not stalking, just waiting. September 8th, 2024 location, Bitterroot Range, Montana, descent trail below. Lightning Scar Ridge. They left the ridge at first light. Neither of them spoke much. The air had that odd, electric stillness of a morning after something unspoken. Leah had slept barely an hour. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of the trees pressing in, heard twigs snapping where no one walked, saw the figure from the photo, that tall, unmoving silhouette near the bench, seared into her brain like an afterimage. Now they were retracing their steps, moving fast, but not recklessly. Just below the scarred pine, Mason stopped. There, he pointed toward a secondary path splitting left, so narrow it looked like runoff erosion. A trickle trail. "I think this loops around," he said. "Could take us back to the cabin from the opposite side, quicker than climbing back up." Leah hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." The descent was brutal. Loose shale gave way underfoot, sending Mason skidding more than once. The brush grew thicker the deeper they dropped, swallowing light, sound, and sense of direction. Eventually, they reached a level shelf cut into the hillside, overhung by rock. Leah wiped sweat from her brow, breath heavy. That's when she saw it. A footprint, fresh, pressed clean into the soft loam. Deep, longer than her boot. Toes pointed uphill, in the direction they'd just come from. "Mason," she whispered. "That's not ours." He froze, looked down, then slowly scanned the trees behind them. "We're being followed." Leah knelt. And he's not trying to hide it anymore. They didn't speak again for an hour. Just moved, controlled, careful, efficient. Mason occasionally looked behind them. Never saw anything, but the feeling never left. By midday, they reached a break in the trees and saw the cabin again, far below, just where they'd left it. But the air was wrong. Smoke, thin and acrid. Mason broke into a run. Leah followed. They found the fire pit burning. Not the one they'd used. A new one. Still smoldering embers pulsing red. Someone had been there less than an hour ago. And near the fire, something was waiting for them, not hidden, not buried, laid out deliberately. A photo, fresh, a printed version of the image they'd found on Simon's negative. The bench, the silhouette behind it. Only now, the photo had been altered. In black ink, someone had circled the shadowed figure, and below it, scrawled in quick, slanted handwriting, "You're looking in the wrong direction." Leah's pulse surged in her throat. Where did they get this? They have the second roll, Mason said. Or they were watching while we found it. Leah looked at him. Simon didn't just vanish. He was taken off the trail. Someone's still trying to keep this buried. A branch cracked deep in the forest behind them. They didn't wait. By sundown, they reached their parked vehicle near the Lost Horse Creek trailhead, dusty, untouched. But taped to the driver's side window was another photo of Leah and Mason, standing at the cairn, taken from above. Mason ripped it down. His hand trembled. This is real. They're watching us. Leah stared at the image. Her own face caught mid-motion, a blur of tension and fear. She didn't remember looking up, didn't remember the camera flash, because there hadn't been one. Whoever took it had been silent, had been above them. She turned to Mason, voice low and calm despite the cold crawling up her spine. We're not going home. Mason blinked. What? She held up the photo. We don't leave, not until we figure out who's still out there. This didn't end in 1995. Simon wasn't the first. Mason nodded slowly. And behind them, deep in the woods, another twig cracked. September 9th, 2024. Location: Missoula, Montana. University of Montana Forensic Imaging Lab. The photo hadn't left Leah's backpack. Not the one from the cairn. That was already sealed in a plastic sleeve. Not the printed negative. Not the circled warning. The one from the car. A photo of her and Mason, taken from above, without their knowledge, with such clarity that even their expressions were visible. It had been taped to their vehicle like a trophy, or a message. Now it was projected on a high-definition screen in the imaging lab, under cold fluorescent lights. Evan Jasson sat at the keyboard, his mouth tight, scanning through layers of digital enhancement. Whoever took this, he muttered, used a serious lens. Telephoto, probably something in the 600-millimeter range. Could have been 300 feet away, maybe more. Leah stood behind him. Her arms were folded across her chest, but her hands trembled. Mason leaned in. Can you pull a reflection? Evan nodded. Already working on it. He zoomed in on a dark smudge in the lower corner of the frame, something mirrored faintly in a granite face near the tree line. After 5 minutes of light balance adjustments, contrast shifts, and spectral filtering, the outline began to emerge. A figure, blurry, high up, holding something long and dark, a camera or maybe a rifle. Evan stepped back from the screen. Jesus, he whispered. You were being watched from the overlook ledge. That's at least 200 feet higher than your position. Leah's jaw clenched. He's tracking hikers who get too close. That's why Simon never came back. But it's not just Simon, Mason said. He reached into his pack and pulled out the folded envelope from the trail log box. Inside were copies of other trail permits, ones that shouldn't have been there. Names, dates, all within a 10-year window from the early 90s. They all vanished along trails that passed near the upper ridge, Mason continued. Simon was the last one before the trail was officially removed. Evan scanned the pages. This is 6 people. That we know of. Leah nodded. There's a pattern. And you said someone followed you, Evan asked. Took that picture yesterday? Mason stared at the screen. We think they were watching us from the ridge above the cairn. Could have been there the whole time. Evan turned slowly in his chair. This isn't just a trail mystery anymore. This is stalking. This is predatory. You need to take this to someone. Leah shook her head. We will, but first, we're going back in. Evan blinked. Why? She pulled a copy of Simon Greaves's search report from her folder. Because the trail doesn't end where the cairn is. If we're right, there's an old fire road north of the ridge. It was decommissioned in the late 1980s, no longer marked. If someone's been living off-grid, Mason added, They're using that road to access the ridge undetected. Evan leaned back. You think the guy who took these photos is living in the woods? Or watching them from the woods, Leah said. There's always been a lookout. That's how they knew where to find us. That's how they saw Simon. And maybe that's where he ended up. Later that day, Leah and Mason met with Ranger Ward again. They laid the photos across his desk. The footprint, the burned fire pit, the high-angle shot. Ward didn't blink. I've been here too long to call any of this impossible. You know where the old fire road is, Leah said. Ward nodded. Runs behind Granite Tooth Bluff. Was used for fuel thinning back in the 70s. It's collapsed now. Or supposed to be. Mason leaned forward. Can you get us access? I can't authorize anything, not officially, but I can point you in the right direction. You'll need off-road gear. It's not a path anymore. It's a cut line buried in forest. Leah exhaled. We'll leave tomorrow. Ward stared at them. You really want to keep going? Leah glanced at Mason, then back at Ward. We're being hunted, but we're not the first. We need to find whoever's been watching that ridge. Ward slowly rose from his chair, walked to a filing cabinet, and returned with a sealed envelope. He slid it across the desk. Then you should see this. Inside was a photo, curled at the edges, printed on silver halide paper. Taken in 1996 by a volunteer search team. It showed the cairn, unfinished. A single stone at its base bore the carving. One the others hadn't been added yet. They weren't just marking the trail, Ward said. They were counting. Leah swallowed hard. And as the room filled with silence, the wind outside rustled the pine branches just enough to sound like whispers against the window glass. September 10th, 2024. Location, Bitterroot Range, Montana. Granite Tooth Bluff access route. The old fire road was barely a memory. Ranger Ward had drawn the route from recollection, a dotted red line across a map that hadn't been updated since 1983. It was supposed to veer north around Granite Tooth Bluff and trace the high perimeter of the ridge trail, skirting the eastern bowl where Simon Greaves's camera had been found. Now it was a mess of tangled alder, fallen trees, and collapsed culverts. The forest had taken it back, but not entirely. Somebody had kept it partially clear. A narrow groove through the brush revealed tire compression, not recent but not ancient either. Probably an ATV. Mason ran his fingers over a bent sapling at the road's edge, where bark had been scraped clean in a long, vertical scar. This isn't from hikers, he said. Someone's been hauling something heavy through here. Leah adjusted her pack. Let's go quiet. By midday, they reached a clearing that shouldn't have existed. Flat, leveled, recently used. Old stumps ringed the perimeter like a long-forgotten outpost. In the center stood a makeshift structure, a one-room cabin built from scavenged wood, covered in faded blue tarp weighed down with stones. Nearby, a rain barrel, a rotted picnic table, and off to the side, partially buried under moss and debris, a rusting trail sign. Leah knelt and wiped the metal plate with her sleeve. Bitterroot National Forest. Fireline spur where access restricted. Decommissioned, Mason scanned the tree line, his voice low. Someone's been living out here. They approached slowly, ears straining for movement. But the clearing was still, silent. Leah pushed open the cabin door, half expecting it to be booby-trapped. It wasn't. The inside smelled of mildew, ash, and old leather. A metal cot with a torn sleeping pad. Shelves lined with dusty canned goods. A wood stove, and beside it, a single chair, facing the only window, aimed directly at the ridgeline they had descended the day before. A perfect line of sight to the cairn. Leah's stomach turned. The walls were covered in maps, decades old, laminated in layers of plastic. Handwritten annotations filled the margins. Red ink, green ink. And pinned beneath a plastic overlay was something else, photographs, all black and white, all taken from a distance, people, hikers, some alone, some in pairs, some blurry, others disturbingly clear. Mason stood beside her, face ashen. These go back years. She reached for one pinned near the top. A man with a beard looking up toward the tree line, wide-eyed, face partially obscured. Written beneath in block letters, August 1991. 3 nights, left alone, didn't return. Below it, another, June 1993, tent site 7, with camera, stayed 2 days, took path, and then Simon Greaves, 695, ridge bench, watched twice. Then gone. At the bottom of the wall, the final pinned image showed a woman. Dark jacket, headlamp around her neck, caught mid-stride on a narrow trail above the cairn. Beneath it, Leah Madsen, 924, came too close, watched. Eyes lifted toward me. Leah stumbled backward. "What the hell?" Mason spun toward the doorway, breath ragged. "He's been watching since we started." Suddenly Leah moved to the shelves, rifling through drawers, crates, old ammo cans. There has to be something more. She opened a locked tackle box, busted the latch with her boot heel. Inside was a manila envelope. She opened it and found what she wasn't ready for. An ID card, Forest Service, issued 1989, expired 1997. Photo, a man in his 30s, lean face, deep-set eyes. Name, Charles Kellerman. She whispered the name aloud. Kellerman. That name's in the ranger logs. Mason stared. That's the guy who was supposed to survey the upper trails before they were closed. The one who disappeared. He didn't disappear, Leah said. He stayed. They turned to the maps again. A secondary trail, marked only in pencil, cut around the backside of the ridge, ending in a spiral drawn in red ink. At the center, a dot. Next to it, written in shaky script, "Everything ends here." Leah folded the map and shoved it into her pack. They left the cabin just as the wind picked up. A sharp gust blew through the clearing, rattling the tarps, the rain barrel, the loose trail sign. And as they moved through the trees, Leah stopped suddenly. A faint click, like a shutter, from above. They both looked up. Nothing but branches, but the feeling had returned, thick and undeniable. He wasn't in the cabin anymore. He was out here, watching and leading them toward the end. September 11th, 2024. Location, Bitterroot Range, Montana, northeast of Granite Tooth Bluff. The trail ended where it never should have begun. By early afternoon, Leah and Mason reached the far side of the bluff, where the hand-marked pencil trail from Kellerman's map had pointed, a slope that dropped into a horseshoe-shaped basin, invisible from any high point. It wasn't on any official topographic charts, a blind spot, and for good reason. It was quiet in a way the forest shouldn't be. Even the wind seemed to hush here. They moved with caution, following the faint groove of a path long buried beneath pine needles and root spread. For over an hour, it was just more forest, dense and twisting, but unremarkable. Then, the trees thinned, and the ground changed, flat, cleared, stained. Mason crouched and brushed his fingers across the dirt. Charcoal, burnt wood, maybe a structure. Leah nodded. Old camp, or something worse. A rusted saw blade lay embedded in a stump. Nearby, a row of 3 wooden stakes protruded from the soil, waist-high. No rope, but clearly placed with intent. Past them, they spotted it. A door, just the door, half buried, standing upright in the earth, framed with rotted lumber, as if it had once been part of a structure that had collapsed around it. Beyond it was only brush and boulders, nothing resembling a room or cabin, but the door stood as if it still guarded something. Leah approached slowly, No hinges, no knob, just a weather-warped rectangle of cedar and nails. Carved across it were the words, "He followed me back." She stared at it. This was a wall once. Mason stepped beside her. He built something here, something he lived in or died in. They circled the area. Behind the door, a pit, collapsed in places, ringed by stone, shards of metal, bone fragments. One piece, a piece of broken eyeglasses, lay half buried beneath a rock. Mason picked it up and held it to the light. The wire frame was bent, the lens missing. Could have belonged to Simon. Leah looked back toward the tree line. Or Kellerman. Then she saw the camera. It was tucked into a hollow under a moss-covered log, partially concealed by sticks. Black plastic body. Long lens. Newer than Simon's, but not recent. Maybe early 2000s. She pulled it out gently. A thin nylon strap was looped around a branch. Deliberate, like a snare. The battery was dead. The memory card was still inside. She held it tightly. Someone wanted us to find this, or thought we never would. They moved quickly back to the cabin. By dusk, they had the memory card loaded into Mason's rugged laptop. The photos began to load. The first 24 were landscapes, surveillance style. Distant shots of campsites, lone hikers, trailheads. Then, a shift. Images of people. A woman boiling water at a campsite. A teenager tying his boots. A man brushing his teeth in a stream. None of them facing the camera. All taken without their knowledge. All deeply invasive. And then came the folder labeled Ridge. Inside were 5 images. Each taken from the same angle, a high bluff overlooking the scarred pine and the stone bench. Each showed someone different. One was Simon. Another was a girl in a yellow jacket, standing near the cairn. A third, unmistakably, was Leah, from just 4 days ago, holding her pack straps, looking up toward the horizon. They had been photographed from this bluff, this pit, by whoever had lived behind that door. But the last image was different. It was blurry, taken at night, flash-lit. It showed a man, face obscured, mouth wide, mid-scream. His eyes were white with panic. Behind him, barely visible in the tree line, stood another figure, blurred, wrong-shaped, too tall. Mason stared at it. "That's not Kellerman." Leah swallowed hard. "No, it's what he saw." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Leah stood. "This isn't just about disappearances," she said. "It's about isolation, watching, being watched. Whatever was out here, fed on it." Mason looked up. "Are you saying it's not human?" "I'm saying Kellerman might have started as a ranger, then he became something else, or let something else in." Outside the cabin, the wind rose again, a sharp, cold gust that slammed the door shut behind them with a single, echoing thud. Neither of them jumped, because they'd expected it. And as they stepped outside into the darkness, Leah turned once more to the ridgeline and whispered, "We found where it ends. Now we figure out how to bring it out." September 12th, 2024. Location, Bitterroot Range, Montana. Return route to Ranger Station, Darby. The memory card had changed everything. The photos were evidence, undeniable, time-stamped, location-locked. But it was the final images, the ones taken in the dark, that haunted Leah the most. Faces twisted in fear, frozen motion, a figure in the tree line that didn't belong to anything living. She hadn't shown those images to Ward yet, not all of them, just the ones he could handle. Now she and Mason were hiking out with hard drives sealed in waterproof bags, GPS data copied and time-stamped, their packs heavier than before. Not with gear, but with consequence. They moved quickly, wordlessly. The fire road that had seemed treacherous days ago now felt like a lifeline, a tunnel out of something ancient, cruel, and unfinished. But just after midday, Mason stopped. Wait. They were nearing the last rise before the Forest Service gate when he spotted it. A branch, broken clean, not by an animal, not by weather, by weight. There were tracks nearby too, boot prints half obscured, heavy tread, and space too far apart to be casual steps. Running. Leah scanned the area. Whoever it was, they passed through here recently. Mason stared at the trail ahead. But why would they come this way now? Leah said nothing, because she already knew. Someone else had seen the camera, or the door, or them, and now the hunt had reversed. They reached the ranger station by early evening, exhaustion etched in every step. Ward was waiting for them on the porch, leaning against the railing like he hadn't moved since they'd left. His expression tightened when he saw their faces. "What did you find?" Leah dropped her pack on the wood planks. "Everything." Ward brought them inside. The room darkened around them as dusk settled over the valley. Mason connected the laptop to the station monitor. Images flickered onto the screen. The same ones Ward had seen earlier. Then Leah opened a new folder. Not labeled, just time-stamped. She showed him the last photo, the one of the screaming man, the shape behind him. Ward didn't blink. "I've seen him," he said quietly. Both Leah and Mason turned. "In '94, Ward continued, "I was called up to assist on a rescue for a Boy Scout troop that got separated during a storm. Found 2 of the boys hiding near a rock shelf off the trail. They said there was someone in the trees, watching them. Wouldn't come closer, wouldn't move. They swore it wasn't a man." "And?" Mason asked. Ward exhaled slowly. "We chalked it up to shock, cold, fear. They'd been out for 2 nights, but the look in their eyes, same as his." He pointed at the screen, like something had broken inside them. Leah looked down at the photo. "Then it's real." Ward leaned forward. "More real than you want it to be." Leah unrolled the map they'd taken from the cabin and pointed to the red spiral Kellerman had drawn. He believed the trail looped, not just physically but psychologically, that it took people apart, isolated them, made them see things or let something see them. Mason added, "The cairns aren't just markers, they're memorials, to people who didn't come back, and every time someone gets close, he watches." Ward rubbed his jaw. "So what happens now?" "We publish the photos," Leah said. "We digitize the records. We name Simon and the others. Make them visible again." "You think that's enough?" "No," she said, "but it's a start." That night they stayed at the ranger station, too drained to drive. Leah couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., she stepped outside and walked to the overlook behind the outpost. The forest rolled out in dark waves beneath a sky littered with stars. The air was colder up here, thin and crisp. Then she saw it, a small glint of light on a distant ridge. Faint, but steady. Not fire, not lightning. A camera flash. She stared for a long time, then whispered aloud, "I see you too." September 13th, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana. Ridge perimeter, aerial survey route. The drone's blades cut through the morning stillness like a wasp. Leah stood behind the operator, arms folded, eyes fixed on the screen. She watched the feed as the drone lifted above the tree line, rose over Granite Tooth Bluff, and dipped into the basin where the trail had vanished. The place Kellerman had mapped, where the door stood like a monument to madness. They had called in favors: the university, the Forest Service. Even a small cold case foundation out of Oregon had lent them equipment and logistics. Ward had kept his word. Quiet support. No red tape. Mason was already inside, checking the hidden cabin for anything they might have missed before sealing it off permanently. The drone skimmed over the ridge. Then it caught something. "Stop," Leah said. The pilot froze the feed. Near the edge of the cliff, just above the scarred pine, a figure stood, perfectly still, wearing dark clothing, facing the valley. The camera zoomed. The figure didn't move. Then, as if knowing it was being watched, it turned. Only there was no face. The hood shadowed the head entirely, and what should have been flesh was flat, gray, masked, or empty. Then the drone feed glitched. The screen flickered. Static. The image warped for 3 seconds, enough time for the figure to vanish. Leah backed away from the screen, heart hammering. "I want that frame pulled and printed." The operator nodded, too stunned to speak. They retrieved the drone, copied the files, drove back to the ranger station in silence. By afternoon, Mason had returned with final samples from the shelter. He laid them on the desk. A length of rope, knotted on both ends, a knife with the blade dulled to a nub, a sealed envelope containing one undeveloped photo. The photo was processed within the hour. It showed the bench again, but this time there was no figure in the background. Instead, the photo was taken from the opposite angle, as if someone had walked around behind the tree line, hiding, capturing the same scene Leah had seen, but from the shadows. "It's from his point of view," Mason whispered. "Kellerman, or the thing he became." And with that, the full picture of what had happened to Simon Greaves, and those who came too close, was no longer just theory. It was documented, filed, known, but not closed. Later that evening, they held a press briefing at the regional ranger headquarters. Leah stood at the podium, tired but certain. Behind her, digital maps and forensic imagery scrolled slowly across a monitor. She didn't sensationalize. She didn't speculate. She named the missing. She showed Simon's last photo. She explained how a forgotten trail had become something far more dangerous than a navigational error. "We believe at least 7 disappearances may be linked to this ridge," she said. "We have photographic evidence. We have artifacts recovered from an off-grid dwelling, and we have a list of names that deserve to be remembered." When someone asked if she believed the perpetrator was still out there, she looked directly into the camera. "Yes," she said, "but I don't think he's alone anymore." October 1st, 2024. Location: Online Archive of Unsolved Outdoor Disappearances. The page went live at midnight. Photos, maps, forensic notes. Every name recovered from the cabin wall. Every image extracted from the cameras. A slow, deliberate public record, not just for closure, but for accountability. Visitors could scroll through Simon's final campsite, see the cairn, read the recovered journal entries, hear Leah narrate, in her own voice, the story of the trail that never appeared on any map, and the man who watched from the trees. And at the bottom of the page, a comment box. It was open to the public, and within hours, messages began to appear. "I saw something like this in the Sawtooths, 1998. We thought it was a ranger, but he never spoke, just watched. My sister vanished in 2001 on a solo in Glacier. I found a photo she took, someone's face behind her in the trees. Please check Olympic National Park. I think you're right. It loops." The screen glowed well into the night, and in a small cabin in Jackson, Leah sat awake, reading each post. Her pack sat by the door. Clean gear, new boots, one map, hand-marked in red ink. And above her desk, a single pinned photo. The bench, the scarred pine, and the figure. Waiting, because some trails don't end. They just go quiet, until someone else walks too far and finds the camera.